Okay, now we're going to look at building heads or tails from the ground up. Let's build our program in Scratch. So the first thing we're going to want is an event to trigger the whole block of code. Now, instead of just saying heads or tails and running that, there's nowhere for us to input. So we need the similar block, but it's in sensing and it's ask. Pick heads or tails, and now we've got the option. However, the value isn't stored anywhere at this point. The program asks and then it doesn't know what to do with your input. So we need to put that into a variable. So Scratch has a built-in variable called answer. Again, in the sensing block just underneath that, it has it here. So if we run that, we can print that. Now, to make this more like what we're going to do in Python and JavaScript, because this is the goal, instead of using the built-in variable, we're going to create a new variable. Cool. Okay, so set user guess to be the value of whatever the input was. And just to test, if I type in heads, you can see that the input is stored in this variable called user guess. Okay, next variable we need to create is the computer's pick. So we're going to set computer pick to be a random number between 0 or 1 to start with. Now, if this random number is equal to 0, then do something. Otherwise, do something else. So the computer's picking either 0 or 1, and we can quickly test that. If I just click on this block of code, you can see the cat at the moment is picking 0 or 1. You could have a look in here. 0 or 1. So what we say is, if the computer pick is 1, then do something. And what we want to do is change the value of that variable to, instead of being 0 or 1, change it to, instead of it being 0, change it to heads. So we're changing the data type from a number to a string. Now, if the computer picks 1, because that's the only other choice here, then we're going to change it to tails. Okay, let's try just that block of code, and you can see now the computer is now picking randomly heads or tails. So just like in a real life game, the computer is picking heads or tails and the user is guessing heads or tails. So then the final step is to compare them. So if the computer's pick of heads or tails matches the user's pick of heads or tails, then we'll say you won. Otherwise, if they don't match, well, then we'll say try again. And we'll join those together and just run it from here. So we can see they match in that case, they match again, this time they don't match, match, don't match. So At its most basic level, our program is working. So now we understand the logic pretty well between the last video with those props and with our Scratch version here. So now I'm going to go into Python. I'm not going to talk so much about the logic and the understanding. I'm just going to talk mainly about the Python code that we need to get the same job done. So REPL it, we've got hashtags here to denote the logic. So hashtag puts a comment so the computer doesn't read. So the first step is that the user's guess is stored in a variable. We have a variable called user guess, and instead of the ask block, we have input So if we just did that without storing it in a variable, we have this. That same problem is that it's not stored anywhere. That the input command is what gives us the option to be able to type afterwards. So to store it in a variable, we have a variable called userGuess and is assigned a value of whatever the user types in. So now we want the computer to pick either 0 or 1. So variable called computer pick equals a random number between 0 or 1. It doesn't have a built-in random module, we have to call it in. Make that the first part of the program. Import random. Now that we have done that, we can say random dot rand integer. So now what we have is a method that says pick a number between a range. So we just want to pick between 0 and 1 for now. And I just want to test this. So I'm going to print out the value of this variable. And it should just be a random. I'm just going to comment out that part. So at the moment, this is the only code that's running. 0, 0, 0, 1. So we can see it is indeed random, very much like the Scratch worked. So I don't need that anymore, and I can grey out that one. I can uncomment that comment. Okay, so now we have one more step in here, and that is, so if the computer's pick was 0, then we want to change that to the word heads. Otherwise, if it picked the only other option, which is 1, change it to tails. Now see here, 2 equal signs compared to 1 equal sign. So a single equals is assignment of value. It's assigning a value to the variable, whereas 2 equals is a comparison of one side to the other. So if computer pick is actually, if the value of this variable is actually 0, then do something. And the thing that we want to do is change the value inside to the word heads. Single equals heads. Otherwise, so with Python, we need the colon and we need to indent the code within the relevant block. Okay, so let's test it now. What is the value of this variable at this point in the program? So we're going to see what it is here when it's 0 or 1 and what it is after this block. So at this point in the program, the computer picked 0, and then it went through this and it said, okay, do I go to this, do I do this one or this one? Well, I'm equal to 0, so I have to do this one and I ignore this one, and so it changes to heads. So now we need to compare. We're going to need 2 equals again. So what I really should be doing is saying, if computer pick is equal to user guess. If they match, then do something. So if they do match, you win. Otherwise, if they don't match, okay, let's try now. Okay, so it does work. How we could improve this game is we could feed back to the user what the computer actually picked, so that we know the computer's not just actually picking the opposite. So how we could do that is we could concatenate the value of the variable. So we could say, you win, I picked and this just lets the people know what the computer actually picked. Now use the color coding here to identify that the syntax is okay. So let's try once more. So you know what you picked and you know what the computer picked. So when we get a mismatch, you can see what you picked and what the computer picked and why it told you whether it matched or it didn't. So let's finish up on the Python version. Now we're going to go into JavaScript and follow the exact same steps. User's guess is stored in a variable. In JavaScript, we have to declare the variable, the var word. Is assigned a value, and instead of input, we've got prompt. So again, if we just run the program at this point, we have the prompt box. We can put in something, but it's not stored anywhere. So we need to assign it to a variable. So we can call on this variable at any point throughout our program now. We've got the user's input. So the computer pick. Random is a little bit complex in JavaScript, but we'll be doing it quite a lot in these applications, so it will become second nature. So I'm just going to comment out. Now notice it's 2 forward slashes in JavaScript, and not a hashtag. We have a built-in method called math.random. Now I'm just going to put it to the document window by going document.write . You can see here I've got a random number between 0 and 1. If we just look around the decimal point, it's between 0 and 1. So I can multiply this by 60. And you can see I'm getting random numbers, but it's hard to tell because I've got all of these floating point numbers afterwards. So I want to round that down with math.floor. So we had math.random as one method, we've got math.floor as another method. There's quite a few. So what I want to do is put this inside of that, and you'll see it's much clearer now. That now we have random numbers between 0 and 60. So now that we've done that, we can actually just bring it down to the two numbers that we want. And because it's between 0 and 2, the results are only going to be 0 or 1. Now this does seem a little bit long-winded, but with JavaScript this is how we do random numbers. So if this variable called computerpick is equal to, so we need to do the condition inside of brackets, and then we do two curly braces. If this condition is true, which if it is true, then run this block of code in here. In which case what we want to do is change computerpick from having a value of 0 to having a value of the word heads. Otherwise, and again, two curly braces, there's no condition to test here because we tested up the top. It's either true here or it goes down to here. So in this case, computerpick is equal to tails. So again, we could test our variable at this point in the program. What is the value of this variable computerpick now that it's gone through all of those steps? So user guess. And the reason for the 1 here is that when we were testing before, I didn't remove that. So if I run it now, user input, computerpick, now we can test if they match. So if the computerpick matches the user's guess, it shouldn't matter which way you do this. It's actually probably better to say if user guess equals computerpick. So we have to put that condition inside, and then we do open close curly braces. So if they match, do something. So we can document.write you win, otherwise document.write try again. So let's run our program and see if it's working as we hope. So at this point, we haven't given the feedback to the user on what the computer's actually picked. So we can say So I'm going to type in heads. It said you win, I picked tails. So there's a little bug here that is matching somewhere. And my guess is that I didn't do 2 equal signs here. Let's try again. You win, I picked heads. So I just put a space in there. Try heads again. Try again, I picked tails. Okay, so I'm going to leave that little error in there because this is what you'll find when you're teaching is that out of a big class, there's bound to be someone who's saying, I'm getting a different result. And this is a very easy one to miss out on. What happened is that I had, when I'm comparing the 2 variables, I had if user guess is assigned computer pick. I'm not sure why that should have even worked in the first place, but what I needed was the equals comparison, one side to the other. And now it's working. Another way that you could improve on this one is that you could have the user input as part of this concatenation of the output to remember or to remind the user what they actually picked, but this is fairly decent. So this finishes up the JavaScript. So we've made the heads or tails game in Scratch, in Python, and in JavaScript, using essentially the same logic and steps, just a few differences in syntax between each language. And the beauty of this is that if you go to a new language like say C#, you could try and work out the start of that language using a simple program like this. Okay, so I'm going to finish up these videos. If you know how to, you could dress them up a bit, but that is something for down the track for here.